What Remains of Edith Finch may just be the most engaging and memorable game of its kind. It delivers a unique and touching narrative that captivated me right up until the credits rolled, without falling into many of the traps that other so-called walking simulators suffer from. Narrated by the titular character, the game explores Edith's memories of her family and their peculiar home. As Edith makes her way through the various rooms of the Finch house, she discovers stories that shed some light on her relatives, and more specifically how each of them died. Each sub-story is presented as its own little playable vignette, and taken on their own, each one is an engaging and emotional tale that feels different from the one that came before. As a whole, they paint a picture of a family that's had to deal with a lot of loss, and even though each section is unique, it achieves a consistent, bittersweet overall tone. This tone is helped along by the game's thoughtful visual presentation, from its varied environments to the way it uses subtitles. The constant floating text that you find in the environment leaves What Remains of Edith Finch feeling like you're being told a story, which is perfect, because that's exactly what it is. Each vignette, as I mentioned earlier, is vastly different to the ones that came before, and not only show off a variety of environments, but also experiment with different art styles entirely sometimes. For example, some relatives have their story told through flipbook cartoons or interactive comic books, rather than simply letting you play through another character's eyes in the same style that you play as Edith herself. While not particularly impressive with regards to its graphics, the game does achieve a lived-in feeling for the Finch home, which is where the majority of the game takes place. I really appreciate the little details like the hundreds of photos found along the walls or the leftover takeaway containers littering the dining room and kitchen. On the whole, What Remains of Edith Finch does look really nice, aside from some serious frame rate drops and texture pop in when you start the game or load back into it respectively. These issues could be PS4 only, but it's disappointing regardless. On a more positive note, the game's sound design is top-notch. The quiet ambiance of the house and its surrounding areas is perfect for the thoughtful nature of the game, and when there is music to be heard, it's light but effective. The voice acting is also on point, whether we're talking about Edith's suitably cautious tone, or one of the various family members whose dialogue represents them fairly well as characters. The main gameplay to be found in What Remains of Edith Finch consists of exploring the old house, but I'd say this only takes up about half of the game. The other half is a combination of unique mechanics that are often only used for one of the relatives' sub-stories, and they're all fairly interesting to play around with. In terms of basic control, What Remains of Edith Finch is about as good as walking simulators get. You move around at a solid pace, and the environments are dense enough the movement never feels like a waste of time. There's always stuff to look at, and plenty of things to interact with. Within each family member's story, however, the gameplay mechanics move away from the traditional experience found within these interactive narratives. Instead of simply walking and interacting with objects, many of these vignettes introduce brand new mechanics unique to them, such as swinging on a swing set or chasing birds as a cat. These unique mechanics, alongside the quality voiceovers, provide a good sense of character to each subplot. We get a decent idea of who each of these family members was, despite our limited time with them. On top of keeping things interesting, each new mechanic that's introduced is simple to pick up, and the game very rarely holds your hand, though this is mostly due to the interactions working off a single, repurposed button. This is a small thing, but the lack of any prompts or pop-up tutorials really helps to keep the atmosphere intact for the game's duration. Speaking of, the game is really only about 2 hours long, and that might be generous on my part. For what it's worth, What Remains of Edith Finch never outstays its welcome, but I did feel like it was over just a little too soon. With that said, I'm thankful that the game left me wanting more and not begging for less. What Remains of Edith Finch is a special game. It's not without some issues, specifically in terms of its performance, but even so, I feel like it might be the most memorable game I've played in its genre. The game keeps things feeling fresh right until the end, and delivers a bittersweet story that is packed with character. If you find yourself enjoying smaller, narrative-focused experiences, then you can't go wrong with What Remains of Edith Finch. What Remains of Edith Finch gets a 9 out of 10.